Hi, everyone. My name is Cass Casmus, and I'm a cadet here in the Jayhawk Battalion at the KU Army ROTC. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for attending today's program, presented by the Department of Military History at the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. After the program, we will have some time for the audience to ask questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and a student worker with a microphone will come to you. Please stand if you are able and ask just one brief question. The Dole Institute's mission is to foster civil and respectful discussion around important and often difficult topics. Please phrase your questions with this in mind. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. And now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Chiang Kai-shek, the Director of the Department of Military History.
Thank you. I get the privilege of introducing our speaker this afternoon, so thanks for coming out. Dr. Geoff Babb was commissioned from Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. I won't give the date. Okay. As a U.S. Army and military intelligence officer, after serving in the Defense Intelligence Agency as a ground forces analyst, he was assigned to Monterey, California, Hong Kong, and Beijing for language and area studies. He was then assigned to the Joint and Army headquarters in Hawaii. In 1991, he joined the Command General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. After retiring from the military, he earned a master's degree in East Asian languages and cultures and a doctorate from this very own university, University of Kansas, so he's one of your own. He is the DMH expert on all things China since Gary Biorgi in the back retired, so we have two of the great ones. His fields of interest are China, Indo-Asia, Pacific, and counterinsurgency, and he has a relatively robust list of publications, and he is one of the Army's go-to minds for China. So without further ado, Geoff, who will talk about Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong.
It's a great turnout. I thought after I did the first 6 months of the Second World War and the Japanese victories, they wouldn't be allowed to be back in here again. Okay, let's talk about the agenda. I'm going to talk very briefly about the early life, and then the Revolutionary Warlord period, Civil War I, War against the Japanese, Civil War II, and then I got some postscripts. And I'll try to end so that we can talk about current China stuff and how these two gentlemen affect what or influence what's going on in the U.S. Indo-PACOM theater today. This is not an ideological brief. This is not a political brief. It's wartime leaders, and I'm going to talk mostly about wartime stuff. But with both Chiang and Mao, you can't get away from politics. And certainly Mao would want me to talk about politics first. Who are these guys? Well, the early life of Chiang Kai-shek, prosperous family, Confucius education, but not upper elite. He did military training in China, then he went off to Japan, did military training in Japan, served a year in the Japanese military as, I think, an artilleryman. Came back to China, and as you can see here, joined the Kuomintang, the People's Nationalist Party, in 1918. But as you can see from the picture here, he was a young officer, and you can see from the picture over there, a bit of a Confucian root. Then there's Mao. Now, I didn't put this in color on purpose. But young Mao, very stern father, caring mother, and he also had a Confucian education early on. He was no lower class peasant. This is a picture of his home, which is outside of Changsha. When you go there, they have a room in there that has his desk because he was taught by he had a tutor and studied the Confucian way. His father, middle peasant, introduced him both to farming and a family business, so he kind of understood the business piece. I'm not sure that made him a very good capitalist, but it certainly turned him off to capitalism. Hunan Normal School. And then you got to understand in China, somebody going to college in China at this time is going to be considered part of the elite. And then his next job, librarian at Beijing University, is even more important in that that's the Harvard of China for all intents and purposes. So he went as a young man to Beijing from Changsha, which is Hunan province in the central south. So after fighting in the Revolutionary, he joined the secret society. There's a lot on the Green Gang and the secret societies. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know what to believe and what not to believe. But he made relationships with powerful people in and around the Shanghai area of China. On the other hand, after graduating from normal school, Mao heads there's a very brief period where he serves in the military, very brief, and then he joins the Communist Party of China. A picture here of the famous May 4th movement, where after the First World War and the Treaty of Versailles, when Japan was able to retain territories in the Pacific and its area around Qingdao in Shandong province, the Chinese were very unhappy. The Chinese joined as allies in the Second World War in August of 1917, and they had representatives at the Treaty of Versailles, but both the Koreans and the Chinese got a really bad deal out of the Treaty of Versailles. This is Mao. This is the building where the first meeting of the Chinese Communist Party happened in 1921. They believed that they might get raided, so they moved to a small island afterwards. There are 12 pictures up here. As far as I know, in 1949, only 2 of them were alive. So being a founder of the Communist Party wasn't good for your health. But Mao certainly survived. And this, obviously, that I have the mark around is Mao's picture. So what did Chiang do? After Sun Yat-sen had the rude awakening that if you don't have a military behind you, you're probably not going to stay in power, he knew he needed a military guy. So, 1911-1912 revolution, Sun Yat-sen is the first leader, but turns it over in 1912 to a guy named Yuan Shikai. And so, when Yuan Shikai dies in 1916, and Sun Yat-sen is coming back, he needs a military guy. And he picks the young Chiang Kai-shek. What were Sun Yat-sen's policies? I'll let you look at those for a minute, but at the end of the day, the Soviet Union was their primary ally at this time. And that has important pieces, because what most Americans don't understand was the Communist Party of China and the KMT worked together, called the First United Front. And in this First United Front, you have Chiang, and in 1923, Chiang is sent to the Soviet Union. One of his sons will go to the Soviet Union as well. These are the 3 principles: nationalism, democracy, and then the people's livelihood, which is sometimes also translated as socialism. So both sides of this equation in the KMT, as it was originally formed, had a very socialist bent. And you had kind of far left socialists and central socialists. The democracy would come over time as the Chinese people, I won't say earned it, but that was sort of the idea. The democracy is for an educated populace that would come, but it wasn't immediately on the horizon. This is the famous Whampoa Military Academy in Huangpu. This is a picture of Chiang, and this is Zhou Enlai. Zhou Enlai will be Mao Tse-tung's second from about 1935-36 all the way to 1976. Now, when you read about Zhou Enlai, early on, Zhou Enlai probably should have emerged as the premier leader. But Mao outdid him. It's interesting that Mao and Zhou Enlai last as long together as they do, because they were certainly rivals, but at some point in time, I think Zhou kind of figured it out, that he was going to be the second for life in terms of this relationship within the Chinese Communist Party, and Mao was going to be the leader. So at the end of the day, you can see them there, and you can go to Whampoa today. It is a tourist attraction. And when you go there, you can go up and see the office of Chiang Kai-shek and the office of his political commissar, Zhou Enlai, which is right next to it in that building. KNT and the CCP connections in Europe. On your left, that's Jiang Jieshi, his son, and his Belarusian wife and child. He went full over communist for a while. He will replace Chiang when Chiang dies in 1975 as the leader of Taiwan. So he has a very interesting beginning background. You see Mao and Wang Ming, and then Zhou Mao and a guy named Bo Gu. Mao is never traveled outside of China until 1950, when he went to the Soviet Union to meet with Stalin. But where does Chinese communism come from? I think an argument can certainly be made that it comes from at least three different vectors. There is the Western European vector, the French-German vector. Then there's the Russian-Soviet vector, and then there's the homegrown vector. And so Mao is the leader of the homegrown communist movement. And these intertwine over time, which is why I really don't want to talk about all of the political ins and outs of the ideology and how it emerged in China. But I would say, since it came out of three roots, they could pick whatever one they want that fit. And they could meld it into what fit for China. And arguably what Mao does is make communism fit in China. And why, arguably, he's still looked upon favorably in China. So at the end of the day, then, you could see this picture is taken up at Yan'an, and I have a map, and I'll show you where Yan'an is later. All right, what's the problem? Down in the south in the blue, because Huangpu Military Academy is in Guangzhou, China, or just outside the outskirts. And that's Guangxi province, which strangely enough is where the leaders of the Taiping Rebellion came from, 1854 to 1865, an ideological based on religious roots, where there are figures that 20 million Chinese died. But in Mao's, in Griffith's translation, Mao and Guerrilla War, in the history chapter, the Taiping Rebellion is specifically mentioned. So I put that there because that came out of Guangxi province. So this is not a detailed map of all the warlords this is just about where the warlords were at any given point in time. So it's warlord China, it's chaos, and Chiang Kai-shek will set out to unite China. Mao is a minor figure in the Communist Party, and he is primarily an organizer of Chinese. You can see him here, third plenum of the KMT Central Committee. This should sound like communism because this is essentially the KMT is a socialist organization, and it uses some of the tried and true systems of meetings, plenums, and party meetings to get their decisions made. Now, this picture is an interesting time in 1927 because the KMT is about to blow apart. Chiang Kai-shek will begin what is normally called the Northern Expedition. At Whampoa, he has built an 8,000-man officer corps, different classes, and built one of the more modern armies that you're going to find in China at the time, although modern in terms of discipline, modern in terms of thinking, not so much in equipment. That's going to change, though. What equipment they are getting is coming from the Soviets. So at Whampoa, the advisors were Soviets. Soviet equipment was coming in. Now, at the end of the day, then, Chiang will march north. He needs to go to Beijing eventually, but he will get to Nanjing and set up a capital. And then he will decide he needs to take out the left wing of the KMT, the Communist Party. And so what's not so fondly known as the Shanghai Massacre will happen when Mao will go after the leadership of the Communist Party of China. Mao will escape. Maybe, again, when you're looking at points in history where there's turning points, there's a turning point when they don't get Mao. So then Mao, and this is very typical of the wonderful art of Communist China, will establish the Red Army on the 1st of August, 1927. And he will do it up in a place called the Jinggang Mountains. So if you could imagine Montana, where you can't get to in West Virginia, so it looks like it should be West Virginia, but it's really Montana. It's far from the coast, and it's far from the main rail line that runs south from Zhengzhou, and the other rail line is north into Shanghai. So it's territory that's pretty mountainous, barren. It's a good place to put a guerrilla movement, and that's called the Soviets. So they will build the Soviets. And that happens from 27 to about 30, and then, by then, Chiang Kai-shek has got a pretty good grip on the rest of China. It's time to go after the communists. So, between 30 and 34, there will be 5 extermination campaigns. The trouble with warlord armies that surrender to you is twofold. They don't fight well away from their home territories, and you don't really want them fighting away from their home territories, because if they're not among their own people, what's to keep them from being unnice to the locals? Not much. So the first 3 are pretty much disasters. Why? Because Chiang is ordering different warlords to go on these campaigns, and they're risk averse. Chiang was paying warlords and their warlord armies based on the numbers of people they had in their army. So if you basically lose all your people, you're not going to get any money. Warlords are risk averse in general. And so Mao, in some ways, takes advantage of that. And the advantage is, in the first 3, they win pretty heartily. 4th one, they finally kind of figure it out, and they start to do what's called blockhouses. They start to build blockhouses, pen them in, and move them. And in the 5th campaign, they've got that down pat, and he will put about 1 million troops in the field and better troops. And that will begin something called the Long March. The Long March, then, is from here. This is the Jiangxi province here, and this is the Jinggang Mountains. And they will push. Another set of communists up here will also be pushed, but they will finally get after Mao down here in the southeast. They will be fighting a more or less conventional war against more or less conventional forces. The trouble is, the conventional forces they're fighting are better equipped, better trained, better organized, and this is their 5th try at it. So at the end of the day, by the time they get to Zuni, there's a meeting. And it is at this meeting that Mao will come to power. And arguably, from then on, it's going to take him another year to really consolidate. But at the end of the day, it is the Zuni Conference where Mao will take control of the Communist Party and the Red Army. Zhou Enlai will be the guy that's probably the most likely to have taken his place. But in the factional infighting that was going on in and around Juni, the communist advisors are kicked out, and Mao wins. So, China has kicked out communist advisors twice, both sides. So what's going to come next? Up to Yan'an. Now, this is like Montana, okay? Bad weather, no people, great place to be. And you can run off to Canada or the Soviet Union, whichever's better when you're up here. So it was a great place to hang out. Great place to visit today. There's a wonderful museum there that has been built for the revolution, which the communists in the last 10 years have really done a magnificent job building new museums for the purpose of building nationalism in China. And they're really world class. The Nanjing Massacre Museum is world class. This one up in Yan'an is world class. I haven't been to Beijing since they've redone the PLA Museum, but I hear that it is also well done. So, everybody know who Edgar Snow is, right? That Kansas City communist? Oh, maybe he wasn't. But he and his wife are the journalists. He's from Kansas City. There's this Edgar Snow Society in Kansas City, and he wrote the book Red Star Over China. And as I understand it, he was instrumental in linking up Mao and Kissinger in the early 70s with the ping-pong diplomacy. Where did it all start? It all starts with him standing with Mao up in Yan'an. Shian is on here because of the Shian crisis. And there are all kinds of wonderful fairy tales about how this happened. Having been to Shian and having gone up to the mountain and seen the writing on the rocks where this is where Chiang Kai-shek was captured, my best story is the one I'm going to tell you. My best story is Chiang Kai-shek went up to Shian to get with his warlords to plan the 6th extermination campaign and get rid of the 25,000 to 35,000 communists that were left. The trouble was, 2 of his warlords, one being a guy named Zhang Zuiliang, kidnapped Chiang Kai-shek. Zhang Zuiliang's father, Zhang Zuolin, had been assassinated by the Japanese. He was the warlord of Manchuria. And so in order for the Japanese to get control of Manchuria, they really had to get rid of Zhang Zuolin. That made his son the enemy of the Japanese forever. So, they have kidnapped Chiang Kai-shek, and this is essentially the negotiation that's going to go on. You're going to stop fighting the communists, and you're going to start fighting the Japanese, or we're going to hand you over to Mao and the communists to do whatever they want with. That's the communist story. The other story is, having captured him, knowing that he is the leader of China most recognized in the world, this was a relatively long negotiation, and of course Chiang Kai-shek, being great nationalist that he was, decided, yes, we Chinese will fight the Japanese together, therefore the Second United Front. So, if those are the 2 poles, anything in between counts. At Yan'an, we get a lot of literature. Now, there are all kinds of claims that who wrote this. It's mostly accredited to Mao. And so it's Mao's selected military writings, where probably most of it was written by Zhu De, who's probably the best general he has, although that's a big fight. He has 10 marshals, and they get very good over time. If you fight long enough and survive, you're going to get better. And they did. But Zhu De, Peng Dehuai, who we fought in Korea, and Lin Biao, who almost took over China until he mysteriously went down in a plane crash in Mongolia, they're all up there. This is the front of the museum up in Yan'an now that I highly recommend. It's a ways to get there. You have to go to Shian, and then it's another 4 hours north. When I was there in '84, it took 12 hours. Now there's a there's essentially an I-70 from Shian to Yan'an. So you can just, there's a bus up there every half hour. You can just go grab on a bus. They'll stop halfway up there at the Howard Johnson knockoff and get a bite. And I would argue Xi'an is probably the most fascinating place to visit in China. So if you're headed for China, I highly recommend Xi'an. This book then, On Guerrilla War, translated by Samuel B. Griffith III, Brigadier General, United States Marine Corps, retired, is a classic. It was translated by Griffith for the United States Marine Corps in 1961 to give them an idea of what it was going to be like to fight communism in Asia. Now, you can make a lot of hay by saying, well, the communism that we fought in Vietnam and the communism in China wasn't the same, and you'd be absolutely right. And the way they did it, in some ways, the guerrilla warfare that we faced in Vietnam was the next level. It was a step up, but it was based on the People's War, and Griffith was absolutely right. Griffith also translated Sun Tzu. And so you can, if you buy a translation of Sun Tzu, I highly recommend the Griffith edition if you're a military person, because a military person is doing the translation. And therefore, it's a translation that we find easier to understand. There are several out there that are also excellent. Probably the most erudite academic one is by Professor Ames from out in Hawaii. But at the end of the day, Army guys, read the Griffith editions. All right, here's the German advisors. Von Seect, we teach at the Commanding General Staff College as the guy, the officer in Germany that after World War I led the movement to do a complete after-action review of the German fight in World War I. And then he heads off, so then he will head off to China, and he'll stay there until they kick Dr. Moose out and the German contingent, which, as I understand it, they were finally asked to leave by the Japanese, and they moved. But from 34 to 37, and you can see this in the uniforms and the pictures from there, the Germans trained and equipped 20 Chinese divisions. They were headed for 60. But by the time they left in 37, they'd only completed 20. They are Chiang Kai-shek's very best divisions. He will squander them in the first 6 months of the war. So, another argument that's out there is to rehabilitate Chiang Kai-shek. And in some ways, he's worth rehabilitating. But in terms of how he lost those divisions, he might have got more out of it. However, the toll that Chiang Kai-shek's forces took on the Japanese forces in 1937 and 1938 has been much maligned and overlooked. The numbers that are coming out as people look at the battles, the Japanese took horrendous losses fighting the Chinese. The trouble was, it took 10 Chinese divisions to equal 1 Japanese division. And the Japanese had superiority in artillery and superiority in air power. It's hard to fight a war if you don't have the artillery and you don't have the air power. Now, there's some people in this room that say you also need tanks, but at the end of the day, air power and artillery will work. So, 60 divisions, that didn't work very well. 60 divisions over 10 years was supposed to happen. It didn't happen. Hopefully this is going to work, Mark. There we go. Sorry. All right. Why did I say this is all being relooked? And these books, Battle of Shanghai, Battle of Nanjing, Battle of Wuhan, have all been written within the last 5-7 years. And they relook how well the Chinese fought the Japanese during this period. And so at the end of the day, though, Chiang Kai-shek will have to move his national headquarters to Chongqing. And he will. So, this does not go very well. I do not think it makes Chiang Kai-shek the generalissimo he thought he would be. But that's a whole nother discussion. This is Chongqing, one of the most heavily bombed cities in World War II. From 38 to 44, there were like over 200 bombing raids on Chongqing. If you go to Chongqing, this isn't a great map, but you have two rivers that come together. This is the Yangtze River and the Jialing River. And this is very high ground and steep. And the Chinese had caves there, and then they built caves there. And that's where they hid during the air raids. There were a couple of air raids where thousands of people were killed, but that was an anomaly. It basically blocked off a tunnel and they suffocated. The toll on buildings was very significant. The toll on people was much less. And in a place called Wangshan Yellow Mountain, there's a compound. And it was the compound of the Sung family and Chiang Kai-shek. And the military advisors were also up there at the time. It's where Marshall stayed when he went out to Chongqing. So, and Stilwell's headquarters, one of 6, was also here. So this is a picture of the refurbished residence. It was being refurbished in 2011 when I got a chance to visit there. Again, back in China today, Chiang Kai-shek has been rehabilitated in terms of nationalism because although he was their enemy during the Civil War, from 1937 to 1945, he fought the Japanese. So for that Chiang Kai-shek's a decent guy. So in the Chongqing Museum that I went into, there was a whole corner. When I went there in '84, it was the American War Crimes Museum. When I went back in 2011, it had a different name. And Chiang Kai-shek got rehabilitated. All right. The other thing I want to talk about is Chiang Kai-shek saved his troops to fight the communists after the Japanese were defeated. That is old speak. Okay? The newer speak says there was only really one battle that the communists fought, the 100 Regiments campaign. They did relatively well against the Japanese for a little while, and it got extended over about 6 months. At the end of it, the Japanese were in control and probably killed between 2 and 2.5 million civilians in the kill all, burn all, destroy all, kill all, destroy all, burn all campaign. If you think the Japanese are well liked in China, not. So at the end of the day then, this part of the whole story of it's the communist guerrillas in China that are doing the great job against the Japanese is not really as great as it could be. We're talking about Chiang losing 1.5 million soldiers and maybe 50,000 guerrillas, and Mao's soldiers being. So, not even any doubt. Where does the great stuff happen? In 1944, there's something called the Ichigo Campaign. And there will be a 4th battle at Changsha. There are 3 battles at Changsha that Chiang's forces will win and do great damage to the Japanese. What are they trying to do? The United States Navy has got Japan blocked off. If they're going to get resupplied from Southeast Asia, it's going to have to be over land and by railway all the way back up to Manchuria, down to Korea, then across. So Ichigo is to hook up with Hanoi. Now this is what Stilwell says. And Chiang Kai-shek says, I'm going to keep divisions back, and I'm not giving them to you to take into Burma to open that road. Because I think what the Japanese are going to do is not so much hook up with Hanoi, is to come get me in Chongqing and to get the big logistics and training base at Kunming. So President Roosevelt will send Major General Patrick Hurley to do an investigation. And Hurley will write back to Roosevelt and say, fire Stilwell. They cannot get along. It's just not going to work. And so Roosevelt will send a message that basically relieves Stilwell, puts General Albert C. Wedemeyer to replace him. But I would argue that Stilwell and Chiang have fought each other hammer and tong from 1941, February, March 42, until he gets fired in 44. They didn't see anything on the same vein. Now, the Generalissimo is commanding over 500 divisions across China. Stilwell makes his fame at the Battle of Michina with Merrill's Marauders fighting 3 U.S. Army brigades, 3 U.S. Army battalions, less than a small brigade. And most of the fighting that was done around there was done by Chinese divisions that Stilwell had trained in India, and the few that Chiang Kai-shek released to come down into Kunming. What's the big day for Chiang? The big day for Chiang is when he becomes one of the big boys. And that happens in November of 43 at Cairo. Stalin's not there. Stalin and Chiang have broken things off. Stalin and the Soviets have a pact with Japan and are neutral in the fight in Asia until 90 days after VE Day, so May 45. In August, Stalin will break that pact. So, one of my favorite pictures, U.S. Army Colonel getting his Legion of Merit from Mao Tse-tung. The other thing that most Americans don't really have much of an appreciation for is, from 44 to 47, a team of U.S. Army and State Department people were living and working in Mao's headquarters. We will leave there in 47. On the other side, this is Stilwell, Madam Chiang, and then this is Wedemeyer, and this is Hurley. Hurley will take off his uniform. He's a politician, National Guard general, who will take off the uniform and become the U.S. ambassador to China. Nobody knows, nobody saw the movie Oppenheimer. Nobody knew it was going to work. I think one of the most interesting things for me is when I talk to the students about when was World War II supposed to end in Asia. If Oppenheimer did his job, it's 45. If Oppenheimer fails, it's 49, 50. So now, the building of 90 Chinese divisions under Chiang, getting him to come down from the 500, this mixed bag of forces, to 90 well-trained, well-equipped divisions with U.S. advisors, looks like a very reasonable thing to do. Reconnecting the Burma Road, which is what Stilwell fought Chiang Kai-shek to do, looks like a great idea, because in February of 45, we opened the road. If we're not going into Japan to take Japan until 47, 48, 49, that gives us over 2 years to build these 90 divisions. We actually built 39 of them and had about 6,000 U.S. advisors in there. So we are on our way, but the end date is not August of 45. The end date is somewhere in 49. That makes a big difference in terms of long-range planning. And you can make an argument that Chiang Kai-shek wasn't doing much long-range planning. After the 100 Regiments campaign, Mao was. Mao was building and organizing for whenever the Japanese were defeated. I would argue, both Chiang and Mao believe The Japanese would eventually be defeated. That's what the United States was going to do, and we were after it. This then is at the end of the war. In the dark pink, this is approximately where the Japanese were. All these little speckled areas like measles, those are communist enclaves. Where's Chiang Kai-shek and his forces? They are just starting to move from Chongqing and Kunming. They're just starting to move this way. Wedemeyer's plan was to take Hong Kong, which would give us the port to start logistically providing that army. So Wedemeyer's idea was to move here and then north. Of course, the war ends in 1945, so this is the mess that we're stuck with. The American advisors are trying to tell him, you must consolidate south of the Yangtze and then move north. I would argue that Chiang Kai-shek was impatient. And he had in 1935 at Yan'an, was one extermination campaign from doing away with all of the Chinese communists, driven them up into the Soviet Union. But when that Shian incident happened and that Second United Front happened, everything happened after that changed things in China. The communists were no longer weak, although in August of 1945, doing a head count of soldiers, Chiang Kai-shek had about 5 million and Mao had about 1 million. So that was the status then. Chiang Kai-shek will sign a non-aggression pact with the Soviets because he thinks Mao is going to lose. Stalin thinks Mao is going to lose. Then you could get into the ideology of that, in that this is a peasant-based communism that doesn't fit well with the urban proletariat. There's all kinds of other reasons. But at the end of the day, Mao doesn't look like the winner in Stalin's eyes. And so he makes a pact. What he's really doing is playing both sides. Whoever wins, Stalin wins. Here we have Hurley as the ambassador and Chiang and Mao. For about 6 weeks, Hurley tries to bring them together to form, for lack of a better term, a third united front. It fails miserably. And so Hurley says, I've had enough of this China stuff. I'm going back to Oklahoma. And he just goes and gets on a plane and flies home. Truman is in a trick. What do you do now? You take the finest soldier diplomat in American Army history, George C. Marshall, and you send him to China. I still haven't quite figured out why Marshall went, other than to say he's the Army officer that lived with the ethic, I go where I am sent, which is exactly what Stilwell had told Marshall back in 1942 when they were deciding what American general was going to go to China. So he went to China. He will stay there a little bit longer. But here you see the wonderful meetings and the wonderful pictures. You got Zhou Enlai and the ambassador and Mao. This a picture of the ambassador being driven around in a Jeep. So there's a hope that there's going to be some sort of united China. Then comes Marshall. And here you see Marshall with Chiang, Marshall with Mao, and you also see Marshall with the two senior representatives of what will be called the executive headquarters. The executive headquarters is the group of an American officer, a nationalist officer, a communist officer, I guess a radio operator, a Jeep driver. They were supposed to go around and look for places where the communists and the nationalists were fighting. They were looking for ceasefire violations. There's a couple of times where Marshall actually gets a ceasefire to happen. They just don't last very long. Mao wants to fight. Chiang wants to fight while negotiating. Strange that we would learn that later in Korea. We fight, negotiate, fight, negotiate, fight, negotiate from 1951 to 1953. It's what they do. And it's what we did. So at the end of the day, this is executive headquarters and its mission. This is perhaps Chiang's biggest mistake. Here he is standing up at Yan'an. Military success, psychological victory. They take Mao's headquarters. However, it's a strategic mistake. This is like Lincoln over here telling McClellan, hey, McClellan, I want you to take Richmond. And McClellan takes his army and goes to Montana. This is a political target, but it's not a very worthwhile military target. The military targets in China are going to be from Shenyang to Shanghai. And maybe that's all Chiang should have done to start with, was consolidate from north to south and consolidate Shanghai, because this is where the railroads and the rail lines are. And if Mao wants to stay out, eating bugs and berries and pumpkins out in the woods, fine. It wasn't a very good strategy, and this is the seminal event of bad strategy. Interesting, I looked this up. I was going to use time covers as I went through the different decades, and it didn't quite work, but it's not because there weren't a lot of covers. Chiang was on the cover of Time 10 times and Mao 12 times. This is a very simple map that shows why Mao won. While Chiang fought everywhere, Mao generally moved from north to west, southwest to south, consolidating behind him. And so Dr. Bjorge here has written the book on the Wai campaign. He can certainly talk about that. It was wasn't the culminating campaign of the war, but it arguably was the most important campaign of the war. Wai. We've done a battlefield tour up here of the Pingjin campaign, and then the Liao Shan. So they move essentially north to south. You can see the dates. November. It is, the communists have now built up, have the forces to fight the surrounded nationalists who've decided to do bastion defense around some of these key areas. And they lose all of them. When you lose all of them, now, don't think guerrilla war. When you put 5 X's over one of these, you're at the group army. Before, you're at the 3 is a corps, 4 is an army. This is a group army. These are hundreds of thousands of troops. And by this time, there's probably 2.5 to 3 million communists and 2.5 million nationalists. And so what you see then is, after Wai, they keep pushing, and that will drive Chiang. So this is the young communists walking into Berlin. This is the nationalists waiting to get on the boat to go to Taiwan. This is Chiang in a parade back in Taiwan. And this is Mao declaring the People's Republic of China in October of 1949 in Beijing. So we're close to culminating. Clear and decisive victory. Why? In simple terms, Mao won the support of the people. The Communist Party of China and the Red Army met their strategic and operational objectives. They provided hope to the people of China. And this idea of land to the people who till it is one of the greatest lies that were ever told to the Chinese people. But it is straight from Sun Yat-sen. And it worked. I'm not saying that all the time psychological warfare operations work, but they certainly helped here. And when you read about Mao, you read about political warfare, psychological operations warfare, as well as military warfare. With Chiang, you mostly get military. We're going to see them again. So this is Mao and Peng Dehuai Peng Dehuai will conduct 5 campaigns against the Americans in Korea. It will be the worst defeat in American military history. They come in October and show that they can come in. The communists, the People's Volunteer Army of Chinese, will come in October and smash up 1 regiment of the 1st Cav and a bunch of Korean units, which is the other really problem with studying this. The history of how well the Korean units fought and how much they suffered defending their own territory, it looks like it was just us. It wasn't just us. And so at the end of the day then, MacArthur flew down and saw Chiang, and Chiang offered to give, I'm going to say 8 divisions to us to fight in Korea, and Truman said, thanks very much, but you might need them yourself. We put the 7th Fleet in the Taiwan Straits to keep Mao from going to Taiwan and Chiang from going to Taiwan to the mainland, arguably. But at the end of the day, this is 8th Army is Walker, and I won't tell the story of the Korean War, except that Mao ordered it. And so MacArthur will be relieved by Truman, and from essentially July of 51 to July of 53, it will be fight, talk, negotiate. The biggest issue was the repatriation of prisoners of war. Some number, and I don't have a good grasp of the number, a great number of the people that we fought had been people that we had trained and equipped. And when they got a chance to surrender to us, they did. And they didn't want to go back to North Korea, and they didn't want to go back to China. And so I've seen figures as high as 80,000 of those POWs ended up in Taiwan. So the story just continues, I guess. It continues because we're still in Korea. What do we do in Taiwan? In May of 51, we then will finally put a military advisory group. That military advisory group was stopped in 49, and there was none. Chiang hired civilian contractors, but in May of 51, we put U.S. military personnel on Taiwan to train the Taiwan military. And then in 54, we had a full-out mutual defense treaty that will last until 1979. 2 Taiwan crises, 54, 55. In 54, 55, the communists will take these islands. These islands still belong to Taiwan today. Eisenhower was not very happy about having to defend these islands. This island here, Jinmen, you can see from the mainland. Just 105 artillery will range it. There's been an article in the paper that says the United States Army has put a U.S. Army SF-A team, 12 men, on Jinmen. They've been there for about 3 months. Where are they? They're right there. A pretty aggressive move and an interesting symbol. There's another one in 58, and it has a little bit wider, but at the end of the day, the next year, Mao will kick the Soviet advisors out. Why? It's strike 3 for the communists, for the Soviets. Not much help in Korea, no help in 54, not much help in 58. Strike 3, you're out. By 62, when the Chinese are fighting the Indians along the Indian border, the Soviets will back the Indians. And by 69, we're playing ping pong with the Chinese. All right. Chiang dies April of 75, and Mao in 76. 2 best books, Babb's opinion. Although I find some flaws with it, he's done magnificent research. He had Chiang's diaries. And that when you read somebody's diaries, then you tend to kind of fall in love with the guy you're doing the biography for. And there's a little bit too much Chiang love in this book, but it's really well written and has really well researched. And then there are dozens and dozens of Mao. I just picked the Philip Short one because it's long and nobody will read it. If you want a nice short one, it was Jonathan Spence has a very nice short Mao biography. All right, legacies for today. Economist magazine, most dangerous place on earth, Taiwan. Xi, the most powerful leader of China since Mao. And then, how scary is China? If you look at how these two armies fought each other, they're not extraordinary military forces. If you look at Korea under Peng Dehuai led the communists at the 100 Regiments campaign. A decade later, he's leading against us. Now, even a blind squirrel can find a nut if they look long enough. And arguably, old Peng was smart, and he also was a good leader. But the militaries of China have always had major problems with equipment, maintenance, and are those problems still there? It's interesting. I think it was in the paper today. There have been, I think, Americans and Australian pilots that the Chinese have hired to train their fighter pilots. We didn't think very much of that. And so that's probably not going to happen much anymore. So, final comments. This is Mao Zedong's picture in Tiananmen Square. This is where he was standing when he declared. And then this is the magnificent shrine to Chiang Kai-shek in Taipei. So with that, that's my story. And I'm sticking to it until either Dr. Huber or Dr. Bjorgi correct me. Oh, and I forgot Dr. Moose. I just saw him come in. You may also correct a lot of the early parts there. Questions? Sorry, Tom? Or comment?
First of all, I enjoyed your presentation very much. My question is sort of obvious, I guess, and as you pointed out, as of 1937, Chiang Kai-shek is he's in Chongqing, and he has this little territory surrounded by warlord authorities, which is also true for years before that, I guess from the beginning.
Yeah.
And Mao's in Yunnan, and also in a little island of authority. He's ruling this tiny territory surrounded by warlords. Mao has a plan from the beginning, really from the foundation of the Communist Party in 1921, to reorganize the whole country along ideological lines, which he eventually succeeds in doing. The question is, does Chiang Kai-shek have a plan like this to reconstruct the whole country? Or is he just going along from day to day trying to cope with the warlords around him?
That's a great question, Tom. I won't say that he was exactly a day trader, but I think if he had a strategy, it was more of a military strategy. The political strategy would kind of fall in based on what I thought he would do: top-down elites. So the elites that he worked with, the CC clique and the Song family, and that upper echelon. So the political plan was top-down. Now, Mao had a make your top-down plan look bottom-up. And it was eventually the one that I would say overcame him. So that my simple answer is Mao never forgets the political plan. Chiang barely has one. Gary.
Sorry.
Yes, you had the great magazine cover there, Mao and Xi Jinping, and I was, you started off with talking about, you mentioned both of them having, or both Mao and Chiang Kai-shek having kind of a Confucian education, a Confucian upbringing, and so they have a lot of similarities, and I think you've brought that out. What I'm wondering about is if you look at this time cover and you think about, okay, Xi Jinping and Mao, do you think that Xi Jinping actually has more of a, let's say, connection or more of a similarity to Mao? Or maybe does he have more of a similarity to Chiang Kai-shek?
One of the first things that Xi Jinping did was put a statue of Confucius back in Tiananmen Square. He he did a couple of things back in the 2012, 2013, 2014 timeframe where we were applauding. We thought that Xi Jinping was going to be the new and better Deng Xiaoping, and things were going to go on. He'd spent a couple of weeks with a farm family up in Iowa. His father had actually gone up to Iowa. His daughter was in Harvard. We had great thoughts back in 2012, 13, 14 that the new leader of China was going to, go forward from Deng Xiaoping. Instead, he went back to Mao. But I think Gary's question is right on. Did he really go back to Confucianism? Is this going to, instead of, socialism with Chinese characteristics, maybe this is Confucianism with Chinese communism, Chinese socialist characteristics. Because they need a way to have the people of China look up to the ruling party. But that means the ruling party. Now, if you read much about the Marxist document, it's the infallibility of the party. If there's someone who's infallible in China, it's probably Confucius. So it's kind of easy to see why Xi Jinping has references all the time in his speeches and his writings about Confucianism. And then he really pounds on the 100 years of humiliation, 1839 to 1949. So I think he is very Confucian, but he has to keep looking over his shoulder as his father, the old communist cadre, to say, I still have got to make that work within this communist system that I've inherited. That would be my best guess. Sir.
Geoff, what contribution did Chiang Kai-shek's attacks of the Japanese army in China have in helping the Americans and their campaigns in the Pacific?
Oh, that's what, okay, next time you're in the building, I give you Ron Mitter's book, Forgotten Ally, and that's an answer in 400 pages. It's going to be better than my next 4 minutes. Much maligned is now being relooked at just how much damage they did to Japanese forces and how it tied down. So in August of 1945, there's probably 1.5 million Japanese soldiers in China. They've probably had more than 500,000 casualties over the 7 years. So there's 2 million Japanese that we didn't have to fight from Guadalcanal to Okinawa. And that's, the new literature is what's bringing that out. But the best book on it right now that I know of is by the Oxford scholar Ron Mitter. Sir.
Shall I wait for the microphone?
Thank you.
We now have a relatively hostile government in Taiwan, At least it's an outspoken government. We have Army forces on Quemoy and military, or rather Marine units that people are at least talking about deploying throughout the South China Sea. And we have a lot of people talking about the importance of rearming or at least better arming Taiwan over the next 2 or 3 years. Why isn't Xi Jinping's timeline for an attack on Taiwan 3 years?
Okay, when is China going to attack Taiwan? Tomorrow, 1927, 2027, 2035, or 2049, or whenever somebody else gets around to it. If I could answer that question, I wouldn't be teaching at Leavenworth. I would be in the National Security Council advising president after president. It is not something that Xi Jinping needs to do tomorrow unless there's some red lines. And the biggest red line is the declaration, the official Declaration of Independence by Taiwan. If that happens, I think the war starts the next day. If it is an attack that takes a buildup so that you can see it coming, so we do like we did in the Ukraine. We call up the Ukraine and say, hey, you're going to be attacked next week. Oh, no, I got it. We're all over it. No, you're going to be attacked next week. No, we're all over it. Next week, they're attacked. They go, oh, you were right. If we know that they're about to attack, I would expect there would be an awful lot of negotiation and then trying to get some sort of an agreement so nobody has to go to war. So I would hesitate to pick a date. I don't think the next 3 years, because the 27, what precipitates that is Xi Jinping told the People's Liberation Army, you will be ready to take Taiwan by 2027. And they all went, yes, sir, of course, sir. They're not ready. But Taiwan has its own issues that it has to deal with. It has wasted a lot of time not building a defense that it should have built. And for that, study Singapore, because Singapore built, sometimes it's called poison shrimp, sometimes it's called the asymmetrical strategy, but it is, if you attack us, we will cause so much pain on your forces that you will rethink it. You'll probably win, but you're really going to pay for it. So we have to get to the point where Taiwan is capable of inflicting enough pain on the People's Liberation Army forces attempting to take it that Xi Jinping is never sure that it will work. And then I got to make sure that Xi Jinping is reading Sun Tzu. Invincibility lies in the defense. The possibility of victory in the offense. And then you go back to chapter 1, where war is the most important activity of the state. It must be studied. If Xi Jinping is studying it, we've done our job and made an asymmetrical warfare strategy on Taiwan work, he won't come. If I go to Walmart with a blank map of Asia and ask the first 100 people to walk in to point out Taiwan and Thailand on that blank map, unless there's somebody there from St. Mary's College St. Mary's University taking international relations, I don't think anybody in Walmart knows where either one of those places are. So how are you going to how are the American people going to make a decision on whether to defend Taiwan or not? That's probably a bigger problem. For that, you need to go to Washington for an answer.
Yeah. Okay. I would just like to make a comment and ask you for your response on dealing with this question of the U.S. responding to an attack on Taiwan. Is that if you look back to World War II, the Japanese strategic thinking is they cannot go into Southeast Asia and allow the American presence in the Philippines to sit there as a threat to their flank. And so they decide we have to not only attack the American bases in the Philippines, we also have to attack Pearl Harbor so that the Americans cannot interfere with our movement into Southeast Asia. Now, do you think it's reasonable to think that the Chinese military strategists are also looking at the issue of attacking Taiwan and thinking, we cannot attack Taiwan, allow our vulnerabilities to be exposed with a powerful American force that could come in and attack our flank? Is that if we want to attack Taiwan, we have to also attack the military bases of the United States and also Japan as part of our attack on Taiwan. And so there's no question then about U.S. becoming involved, because they would attack us as part of the attack on Taiwan. Does that sound reasonable?
I think that is exactly the thinking in U.S. Indo-PACOM headquarters. I think you have the strategy from our perspective down pat. But remember, we are generally an offensive, they are generally defensive in orientation. So for our offensive orientation, which now you can answer, somebody else can answer this one. Xi Jinping, when Duterte was the leader of the Philippines, could have gone down there, did a little Belt and Road magic, laid a few $100 million on infrastructure in the Philippines, and the Philippines would have done away with our mutual defense treaty with them. He didn't do it. So my only response to you is, he had a golden opportunity to take the Philippines away from us, and he didn't do it, and I don't know why he didn't. The other one is Japan. So, Tom, can we use Japanese bases to defend Taiwan?
They would certainly help. It'd be harder to do it without those bases. I'm not seeing a huge capability of naval mobilization coming out of the Japanese bases or the
Better answer than you would have got from me if you'd have been the other way around. Again, in a lot of ways, the Philippines, Guam, Japan are the key triangle for the defense of Taiwan, and they have to be built up. Now, we're only going to pay about $864 billion next year for our defense budget. So somewhere in there ought to be a big stack of money to start dealing with that. In the paper today, I believe that the Secretary of Defense has said we are thoroughly thinking about putting a 4-star general in the headquarters in Japan. That is sort of a signal, I think, to Xi Jinping that Japan is not only our treaty ally in terms of defending them, because it's a defense treaty with Japan. It's growing beyond that. It's the basis from which we would defend Taiwan, plus Guam, plus we've been working with the Philippines. I mean, who would have thought that Marcos' son, Bong Bong, would be the guy that's bringing the Philippines and the United States closer together? So I am glad I'm an historian. I'm just trying to interpret the past. You guys get to interpret the future mess we're going to get into. Good? Well, great questions, and thoroughly enjoyed them and thoroughly helped the answer. Oh, next slide.